Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I want to bring you back, Ken Delaney, for a moment. Ken, I know you've read in a bit more on these new charges. Tell us what you know.
Yeah, Stephanie, we have some more context here. And also, I should mention, as Pete Williams pointed out, this is a criminal information, which often suggests that the defendant is poised to plead guilty. And secondly, the context here is that this person apparently has allegedly lied about his communications with Rick Gates, the Paul Manafort partner who has been in the news lately amid speculation that he is about to cut a deal with Robert Mueller. And so it has to do with text messages with Gates about a Ukrainian politician named Yulia Tymoshenko. Gates and Manafort were on the other side of her. They were working for Ukrainian Prime Minister and accusing Tymoshenko of corruption. These documents suggest that this lawyer, Mr. Vanderswan, who's been charged with making false statements to the FBI, did not tell the truth about his text messages with Gates and actually tried to destroy an email and keep it from the special counsel's office. The question here is, how do they find out about this email? One possibility is they got it from Gates, if Gates is indeed cooperating. That's just trying to read into potentially how they got this information.
Wow, Stephanie. Rick Gates may be cooperating. It harkens back to the last interview I had with Anthony Scaramucci, where he said President Trump picks the best people. He's a great judge of character. And it sounds like there may be a new person flipping. Malcolm, I turn to you. Michael first. I know we're just learning this news. What's your reaction?
My reaction is the same as Ken's. This certainly comes from Gates, who we learned over the weekend is desperate to cut a deal to stay out of prison. He apparently has 4 children and doesn't want to mount a massive defense. It tells you that Paul Manafort is in even deeper trouble than ever, but it also tells us a lot about what the special counsel is after. The special counsel is definitely looking into the Ukrainian links that Manafort had, and then, of course, whether Manafort did anything more than what we already know vis-a-vis his position on the Trump campaign. Remember that Manafort sent a note right after he became the campaign chairman for President Trump. He sent a note to one of the oligarchs in Ukraine saying, hey, listen, I'm working for President Trump here. Make sure my former client knows that so that I might be able to make him whole, as in, you know, Manafort owed him a considerable amount of money, had gone dark for several years.
Are you talking about aluminum king Oleg Deripaska?
I am talking about Deripaska, who was the aluminum magnate who, by the way, was at the Munich Security Conference this weekend, is still very much in circulation, is a close ally of Putin, and was very close to Manafort. So all of this tells us that the special counsel is getting very deep into those relationships between Manafort, the Ukrainians, and oligarchs in general.
He certainly is. Oleg Deripaska, I believe, who was born and raised in Siberia. So he may have some ice running through his veins, while the president seems to be very fired up, at least on social media this weekend. Malcolm, what's your take on this?
Well, I agree with Mr. Allen. This appears that Manafort is conducting at that level, what we're seeing from this indictment. This is where the counterintelligence part of this game is coming in. He's going back to the very beginning of Russian money channeled through the Ukraine, through the present government at that time, which was in opposition to Yulia Tymoshenko, all I can say is this guy is going for every dollar which Moscow may have originally funded through Manafort from the beginning of this thing. He's not starting with the 2016 election at all. He's scrubbing this man's past to the Kremlin. And he is going to work his way up to the election. And I think we're going to be seeing, if they're going after lawyers that were associated with Gates,
if that's the case,
we're going to see some indictments out of this.
If that's the case, how dangerous is that? How dangerous is that for President Trump and his family? If you notice, President Trump always says, no collusion, no collusion. I'm going through my notes. I never find him saying no money laundering. And actually, after President Trump won the election, I went to see a few big New York businessmen, one in specific who supported President Trump, who said Donald Trump needs to quiet down going after the intelligence agencies, for example. He's never run a clean business, and he does not want them looking under his hood. For the most part, President Trump's career, his businesses, have been private businesses. He has not had the scrutiny that public CEOs have. How dangerous is it, I turn to you, Michael, that it seems that Robert Mueller is really digging in to the money trail?
I think it's very significant. We've seen a lot of press in the past few weeks past few months really, about how the real estate property market works. It is apparently a well-known conduit for money laundering. And so that's not to say that the Trump empire or Kushner were necessarily involved, but there is a lot of discussion around Kushner's investments in New York, who his co-investors were, whether Russians owned property or condominiums in some of the properties owned by Trump and Kushner. So I think what this begins to tell us, in addition to what Malcolm said, which is that they're very important, it's also that they're looking at money laundering.
We should point out the Kushner family is going to great lengths, and they have been for a few months, to keep private who their co-investors are. And we do need to remind you, Paul Manafort was potentially laundering money through the Bank of Cyprus. Who is the board chair of the Bank of Cyprus? Our Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross. Who did Wilbur Ross put on the board of the Bank of Cyprus? The former chairman of Deutsche Bank, the bank that did business with both the Kushners and the Trumps. Maybe it's all a coincidence, but we know Robert Mueller is certainly working on it.
It is Wednesday, the 21st of February of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid me of this priest? Well, no, it's normally it's just a simple egg dish with a hollandaise sauce, but today we will have to acknowledge that Billy Graham is dead at 99. Went to the great beyond. I don't think it's at the pearly gates. I think he's, sitting around some brimstone, discussing the virtues of the separation of the races with Beelzebub. Now, I have to admit, knowing of Billy Graham, he may consider that to be heaven, whereas most of us would consider that to be hell. But you never know. And speaking of entities going to the great beyond, there was a Twitter purge last night. Yes, it looks like one Donald Trump lost over 4 million followers because of the Russian bots. And a lot of wingers are up right now complaining about a grand conspiracy and that it is censorship. Yeah, well, as far as I know, Twitter is not a government entity. I do qualify it with as far as I know, because it could be, but I don't think so. And they're whining. Richard Spencer, the dapper neo-Nazi, he calls himself alt-right. He's a neo-Nazi. And he's really whining right now, as well as a lot of them. Cernovich is whining. I can't wait. Now, Trump may have tweeted, but I don't follow that guy. If he comes into my timeline, I'll respond. Speaking of people coming into my timeline, Dinesh D'Souza showed up in my timeline mocking the Parkland students. What? So it just goes to show that, you know, when they say guns don't kill people, well, people don't mock the Parkland students who survived a mass killing and want to make sure it doesn't happen again. People don't do that, but ghouls do. Yes, and he's a ghoul. And I was wondering, is that a violation of his parole? Shouldn't he be back in jail? That's how they are. Oh, Dana Loesch. She's going to show up at the town hall meeting with the students tonight. Well, I don't know. I'd like to see Emma Gonzalez and Dana Loesch in a grudge match tag team debate. I'd pay $1 for that. Oh boy. So, what else? What else has gone on? Mueller has indicted somebody very close to Putin. Yes, his name is Herman. You think it says German, but the G is a little bit different over there. Herman. Yeah, he runs Alpha Bank. You know, Alpha Bank, the one that has that server in Trump Tower. Oh my God. People better be going to jail. I swear to God. I know that, you know, like this young lawyer will be going to jail for lying to FBI agents. Certainly Manafort's going to jail. Rick Gates will spend some time. I think Mike Flynn's going to spend a considerable time too, though he did cut a deal, and, you know, for probably lesser time. We'll see how this works out. But I'm talking about, you know, not necessarily in the orbit of Trump, but within the mass of it. Okay? Why don't we just go right to the principles involved? All right. Well, you know, a lot of people don't run for president because they really don't want their past being brought up. And this guy thinks, I'm so rich, I can hide my past. Or I will just lie. And this is the fallacy in their argument. They think that the other 3/4 or more of us are just as stupid as their followers, their cult 45. And the Parkland students are proving that is not the case. And no wonder the GOP is whining. The kids shouldn't lead us. Yeah, that's exactly what they said when we were stopping the Vietnam War. Remember that? Yeah. They're afraid of student movements, always have been. They hate them, they fear them, and they will do anything possible to, make sure that it gets crushed. But history proves that the student movements prevail. You might be able to say, well, they ran the tanks into Prague and they ran the tanks into Hungary in 56 and whatnot, or even Tiananmen Square, because that was a student movement too. But did it really get crushed? A lot of people died that we don't know about in Tiananmen Square, but did that movement really get crushed? Okay, so special election occurred last night, and a Kentucky GOP seat that Trump carried by 49 points was flipped by actually the former holder of that seat in District 49. This former school teacher had held onto that seat, and then in the Trump wave, a guy, oh God, I can't remember his name now, but he won by 1 percentage point. And he had somewhat of a checkered past. He ran a biker bar church and had a choir of AR-15s, people holding AR-15s, I believe. Some sort of weird gun, okay? Singing gospel hymns. And he had been involved in a few financial fraud cases, and what ended up, the reason it became a special election, is that he had not only been accused, but pretty much was ready to be sentenced or convicted and sentenced for sexually abusing a child, and then the guy went and killed himself. There's a lot of that happening on the right side of the spectrum. Isn't that weird? Maybe not all the way up to suicide, but, the other parts. So that's how that District 49 in Kentucky fell under the aegis of a special election. And the former school teacher won it back by almost 50 points. And good for her, because that's number 37 on what we flipped so far. And we need more. Okay, these special elections are indeed a harbinger of what will happen in November. What will be happening on the rest of the day here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy in the, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays is our daily special. Oh, well, starting off here in the Bistro Cafe, you heard that a panel with Malcolm Nance and others, not Stephanie Rule. Oh God, I forget her name. Going to kill me. She, former Bush administration person, and I know I'm having a brain lock in the morning. I apologize. It might be age related, and I think my demographics, the people listening to the show, would actually know from whence I speak. Oh boy! So this latest indictment with this young lawyer indicates that Mueller's investigation is going to scrub all of the money Manafort received from the Russians and Ukrainians even before his relationship with the Donald. Which then goes, because, this is, when you play football, sometimes you show a little bit about what you're going to do. Presage things, preview them. Get the other team to, see what your capabilities are. Going after this young lawyer means that you can't hide behind lawyer-client privilege. If your lawyer lies for you, that is a crime. Okay? Still a crime. Going after this Herman guy from Alpha Bank, okay? That's getting pretty damn close to home. And I'm talking about Trump Tower home, or Mar-a-Lago, depending. It shows that Mueller, I think, is willing to pick up the money that Trump has received from Russians and Ukrainians, even before his relationship with Manafort. And then on the rest of the menu, the World Health Organization issues a report that anti-vaxxers are responsible for an explosion of measles in Europe. Alaska will no longer allow workers with disabilities to be paid less than the minimum wage. 2018, and we're still doing that? Well, I'm glad that Alaska decided to catch up. And Trump hopes a federal court will restore the congressional map that was ruled unconstitutional by Pennsylvania's top court, who the GOP in Pennsylvania are trying to impeach. God, these guys, they can't win on the merits. They always have to cheat. And after the break, we'll move to the chef's table to consider how the Baltimore police corruption scandal proves robbery is still illegal, even when cops are pocketing the spoils. And there is an overlooked detail in Mueller's indictment of Russian operatives. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Starting off here on the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, is an article out of Popular Science by Sarah Chodouche. Now, before the measles vaccine existed, 9 out of every 10 kids got the disease before age 15. 2 million people died from it every year. And now that's easy for most of us to forget because we've had an effective measles vaccine since 1960. Measles is so infectious that it spreads to 90% of those who come in contact with an infected person. Those symptoms don't usually show up until about 2 weeks or at least a week later. And it starts with the usual fever, cough, runny nose. Then a few days later, you develop little white spots inside your mouth. Then the rash soon begins. Red spots spread from your hairline all the way down to your feet, and your fever spikes, sometimes soaring over 104 degrees. Most people survive, but if there are complications, death rates can hit up to 30%. Most people do survive, but pneumonia is the most common fatal side effect. But patients can also experience swelling of the brain, which can cause permanent deafness or blindness. Prior to the vaccine in 1960, between 15,000 and 60,000 people went blind because of the measles each year. And yet, despite having a cheap way to prevent one of the most infectious diseases in the world, most countries still have not met the target goal for vaccination coverage. That means those countries continue to have deadly outbreaks. Now, that's why the World Health Organization recently warned that measles is making a comeback in Europe, where most had considered it a thing of the past. In 2016, get this, folks. In 2016, Europe reached a record low number of cases, just 5,273. And then it spiked last year to 21,315. Okay, so the article goes on to give some testimonials of from each, or not testimonials, but a rundown of each country and how many outbreaks of measles have occurred. And the conclusion, though, is that it seems mostly driven by the anti-vaxxer movement, which has flourished since bogus research in the 90s claimed that measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine caused autism. So, of course, his research was totally debunked. He got disbarred, or his medical license ripped. Can't do research anymore without... we all know the story. So anti-vaxxers seem to have gotten more than a foothold in Europe, and it's not a good thing. Next article here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is by Rebecca Intralgo out of Think Progress. Now, I had made a mistake. Actually, Alaska joins Maryland and New Hampshire as the first states to get rid of the sub-minimum wage for employees with disabilities. The minimum wage now in Alaska is $9.84 an hour. Let's see, the state's Department of Labor and Workforce Development Acting Commissioner Greg Cashin said that workers who experience disabilities are valued members of Alaska's workforce, and they deserve minimum wage protections as much as any other Alaska worker. Now this has been perfectly legal. This law was first put into place in Alaska in 1978. But under federal law, it's been the case since 1938 when the Fair Labor Standards Act was implemented. The idea of paying workers with disabilities minimum wage was so that those with disabilities could get a job, because they couldn't get a job at all. So the intentions were good, but it just fell a tad short. And the article goes on to note that the worst offender is Goodwill Industries. And they say, oh, yeah, but it's not about the money. Fulfillment of life. That has value too. Yeah, but it doesn't pay the bills, okay? And as far as I know, usually people with disabilities still have to pay their rent and their taxes, etc., etc., etc. So good for Alaska. Now we should get the rest of the country on board with this, shouldn't we? Okay, finishing up here on the Bistro Cafe is an article out of Think Progress as well by Aaron Ruper. Yesterday morning, Donald Trump urged Pennsylvania Republicans to challenge a new map of the state's congressional districts issued by the state Supreme Court after justices determined the previous map drawn by Republican lawmakers was unconstitutionally gerrymandered. And Donald Trump goes, what's wrong with that? He says, hope Republicans in the great state of Pennsylvania challenge the new pushed congressional map all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary, Trump tweeted. Your original was correct. Don't let the Dems take elections away from you so they can raise taxes and waste money. Shut up, Donald. This trope of raising taxes and stealing money. My experience is that the Republicans always... the deficit always goes up astronomically. And we are worse off in terms of our economy. Talking about stealing money. How about money from our country going somewhere else? Like around the Siberian steppes. In a very secret vault. First it gets laundered through Wilbur's Bank in Crete. So this is what this guy's out for. And, of course, if you look at the Republican gerrymandered map, well, the reason it was ruled unconstitutional, not only is Republicans in firm control of 13 of the state's 18 congressional districts, even though Democrats consistently outvote Republicans in Pennsylvania. They keep calling Pennsylvania a swing state. If they counted the votes as they come in, yeah. Well, of course, the court-drawn map was only drawn up because the Pennsylvania legislature controlled by Republicans refused to get a new map that would fulfill legal muster. And they gave them a deadline. They missed it, and the court imposed their map. And you know what they did? It looks pretty. And it gives about 9-9. Even. But in the GOP mind, and especially Donald Trump's, that is called stealing. Stealing, folks. That's what they think. Equality to them means that they lose something. If you are equal with them, that means they're brought down to you. You're not brought up to them. They've been brought down to you. Yeah. Okay, so it's ironic, Rupert continues here, that Trump would accuse Pennsylvania's Democratic lawmakers of trying to rig elections, given that the need for a new map was created by one of the most egregious Republican gerrymanders in the country. While Donald Trump might think the original Republican-drawn map was correct, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court rejected it earlier this month because the justices ruled that it clearly, plainly, and palpably violated the state constitution. The 2011 map gave Republicans firm control of 13 of the state's 18 congressional districts, despite the fact that the Republican candidates received just about less than half the vote. And the state Supreme Court gave the legislature a February 15 deadline to come up with a new, fairer map after Governor Tom Wolf, the Democrat there, rejected a second Republican attempt at a congressional map that was just as gerrymandered as the first. So that deadline passed. leading the court to step in. And on Monday, the state Supreme Court responded with a new map that should make the state more competitive. But they don't want it to be competitive. They always say capitalism, the magic of the market. Well, what is capitalism and the magic of the market? It always results in a monopoly. That's what they want. A monopoly, a dictatorship, an oligarchy. We can't let them have it. So we'll go ahead and take our break now and move back to the chef's table. We'll go over the weather and the rest of the stories that we have listed for today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. One of the drawbacks of researching blue whales is that most of the time you can't see what your study subjects are doing, or how many there are, or even where they are. Satellite tags have revealed some of their diving behavior and where they migrate, but tags will never give a complete picture of the population at large.
Because it's really hard to put a tag on a whale.
Anna Shirovich, an oceanographer at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography.
We have 121 tags that have been deployed on blue whales, and we're talking about 16 or so years of field work. So it's not realistic to think that we can actually go out and just tag all the animals and figure out that way how many there are.
But Shirovich is using another method to track the underwater giants, eavesdropping on their songs and calls. That's sped up so you can hear it, by the way. Much of the sound they produce is outside of our hearing range. Shirovich and her team analyzed more than a decade's worth of blue whale sound and found that, in general, males seem to be more vocal than females. Especially at night, perhaps because they prefer feeding by day.
It's kind of like they don't like to speak with their mouth full. When they're feeding, they're focusing on that, and then if they start calling, that's what they're doing.
And though no one's actually seen blue whales having sex, Shirovich says this song may have something to do with it, because when the whales are getting more in the mood during the year, that song gets more common. She presented these findings at the recent 2018 Ocean Sciences meeting in Portland, Oregon. Shirovich's goal is bigger than simply understanding the way whales communicate.
Ultimately, the idea is that we would be able to say, oh, look, there's X number of calls in this area, and we know that means that is Y number of animals.
And thus use sound to better understand the lives of these most elusive of study subjects. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Welcome to 60-Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. In August of 1963, thousands of Americans marched in Washington, D.C. They wanted to show their support for the civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was an important civil rights leader. It was there that Dr. King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. After a day of speeches, prayer, and songs, the march's organizers met with President John F. Kennedy. Kennedy announced that he would ask Congress to enact major new civil rights legislation. He was assassinated 3 months later. The task of pushing for the legislation fell to his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson. In 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended segregation in public places, such as restaurants and hotels. The law also said that employers could not discriminate against people because of their race, national origin, religion, or gender. When African Americans won these civil rights after years of struggle, other groups began to call for equal protection. Women, disabled people, older people, Native Americans, and many other groups worked to get laws passed guaranteeing their right to equal protection of the laws. In response to their efforts, Congress and state legislatures have passed laws prohibiting unfair discrimination against these groups. That's all for today's podcast, 60-Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report recorded on Tuesday, February 20th, 2018. I'm Mark Belanger. The labor movement has not only been at the forefront of the struggle against sexual harassment, it has also been part of the problem. But things are changing. As an example, just recently, the AFL-CIO in the United States held a conference to discuss sexual harassment in the workplace and labor unions. The AFL-CIO is the largest labor federation in the United States. Richard Trumka is the organization's president.
I want to start by reading the AFL-CIO Code of Conduct, and it reads as follows. The AFL-CIO is committed to providing an environment free from discrimination and harassment, regardless of an individual's race, ethnicity, religion, color, sex, age, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, gender identity or expression, ancestry, pregnancy, or any other characteristic prohibited by law. As such, the AFL-CIO will not tolerate discrimination, harassing, or otherwise unacceptable behavior in the workplace or at any of our activities, events, or meetings. We adopt the Code of Conduct, and we expect everyone in the workplace and those that participate in any of our activities, events, or meetings to abide by it. And I got to tell you, long before Harvey Weinstein became a household name, we adopted this comprehensive code of conduct that goes beyond the law of the land and is read at every AFL-CIO event throughout the country. When we begin our union events with these important words, it's a very, very powerful signal that harassment and retaliation and discrimination won't be tolerated. And it helps to move the cultural change that we need at work and in all of our unions. I'm extremely proud of and humbled by the courage of the women who are bringing this issue of sexual harassment to the forefront, including my sister and my partner, AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Schuller. Liz. And let me assert another hard truth. Labor's been part of the problem. See, sexism and misogyny in our ranks has been tolerated for far too long. Some of you have personally experienced it. The looks, the comments, the innuendo. See, this old boys club mentality must die, and it really must die today. Here's the good news. Labor is also part of the solution. We're still the greatest force for social change in America. We can combat sexism with solidarity. We can tear down misogyny with movement building. And we can use our own contracts to discourage bad behavior and to punish bad actors. And let me leave you with this. No worker, I don't care what you do, how high or how low the position is perceived, no worker should be treated like a piece of property. No one should be touched or bullied or harassed or assaulted or discriminated against on the job. No worker.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Follow us on Twitter @Radio Labor. I'm Mark Belanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. The UN's Children Fund, UNICEF, says the world is failing newborn babies, as newborns from the riskiest places to give birth, like Pakistan or the Central African Republic, are more than 50 times more likely to die than those in the safest places like Japan, Singapore, or Scandinavia. Building up robust health systems in low-income countries is a daunting task, but Willibald Zek, the head of UNICEF's Global Maternal, Newborn, and Adolescent Health Program, says there are cheaper and easier ways to stem newborn deaths.
There are proven interventions, and many of them, or most of them, are very simple. For instance, skin-to-skin contact straight after birth. It means that we put the newborn on the tummy of the mother and let the newborn breastfeed and cover it so the newborn is kept warm.
Other low-cost interventions to prevent newborn deaths, including making sure clean water and disinfectants are used during birth. And Turkey is threatening the Syrian army of President Bashar al-Assad, warning that if Syrian soldiers try and step in to defend Kurdish fighters in northwestern Syria, they too could come under fire. For weeks, Turkey has been attacking Kurdish fighters on Syrian territory, claiming they are terrorists that pose a direct risk to Turkish security. Sensing the possibility of direct warfare between Turkey and Syria, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov appealed for calm on Tuesday and urged both sides to engage in dialogue. The Syrian military has been almost entirely absent from northwestern Syria since the beginning of the country's civil war in 2012. But as opposition groups continue to lose ground across the country, the Assad government has sought to re-establish control of the region to make sure the territory isn't lost once the war settles down. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Well, thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. It is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays is our daily special. Now, if you go to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you notice the chat room link at the left, or I'm sorry, at the rightish of the page. Our roaring girl, Kelly Lincoln, monitors that quite diligently, of course. And another way to contact us or me is I'm on Twitter at Justice Putnam. You can also contact Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that pretty much, and I'll get the messages. And that's at Netroots Radio on Twitter. And I can be found on Daily Co's as Justice Putnam, and that's where I put the daily diaries with all the show notes and links. So, yeah, do your homework. Okay. Well, now that we are at the chef's table, safely and securely and comfortably ensconced, we'll have a palate cleanser, which is always the weather from around the world. And we begin along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States. It is currently 32 degrees. We had a bit of a snow shower last night. Things are actually melting. So it says 32. I checked my new weather station that I have here, the kind that you don't get to link up, unfortunately. But it says that it's 35, so things are melting a bit. Ostensibly, we're going to be a tad warmer today, expected to go about 45. We'll see. And then rain through the day. And then tonight, we will plummet to 29 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit with snow showers. Winds currently are light and variable out of the south-southwest, and then they will increase to 5 to 10 miles tonight out of the southwest. Air quality index here in the Rogue River Valley is 27 parts per million. Well, if you got problems with breathing, maybe wear a mask still. Pressure has gone up just a tad to 30.19 inches. Visibility has gone up to 7 miles. It was less than a half mile earlier. And humidity is at 93%. Okay, well, weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. They planted them in their property, and these people live around the world. London is 45 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 40 degrees and sunny. Rome is 53 and partly cloudy. Kiev is 30 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 34 degrees with light rain. Hong Kong is 58 with rain showers. Tokyo is 42 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 68 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 44 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 64 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased, they planted them in their property, and these people live around the world. Okay, this article by D. Watkins out of Salon clears up a little bit about this Baltimore police scandal. Apparently, they weren't just targeting criminals. That was their excuse, is that, we might have been, taking some, drug dealers' stash, and their money, but they were criminals. Well, apparently they didn't go after just criminals. They would go after people because they wanted their property. So, Baltimore City police officers of the Gun Trace Task Force, or GTTF, are guilty of a plethora of crimes falling under their racketeering convictions, ranging from robbery and selling drugs to fraud. All 8 men are currently awaiting sentencing. And the cops don't... The reporter said that as they've been following the case, listening to opinions and collecting information, one common narrative that they heard was those cops only targeted criminals. They had to use special tactics to keep up with the everyday evolving world of crime, and everyday citizens were not affected by their actions. Well, that claim is problematic for a number of reasons. Let's use the case of April Sims as an example. Sims, a successful hairstylist in Baltimore, was targeted by the task force back in 2016. Her flashy car caught the attention of Jenkins, and he started watching her apartment, excitedly reporting suspicious activity to Gondo, according to the Baltimore Sun. Jenkins then crafted a plan to raid her home in search of cash and other goods. He told Gondo that only he, they, and Herschel, these are all the cops that had been listed at the beginning here, would be involved in the mission. He thought there would be about $40,000 to $50,000 inside that. The 3 could split. Herschel responded, "I can use the money. I'm in the process of buying a house." The officers were caught on tape entering her complex. They were denied access by security until Herschel came in with a piece of paper and some police gear. The trio found no cash. However, they did retrieve 390 grams of heroin, gel caps, a digital scale, and a Chanel bag worth $5,000. Well, they turned in the drugs along with the rest of the paraphernalia, and Gondo gave the purse to a woman he was dating. Reporting the drugs was not an example of good police work. It was a petty attempt to make Sims pay for not having cash in the house for the police officers to steal. 390 grams of heroin, folks. Digital scale, oh yeah. Okay, we'll see. Now, the counter-argument revolves around the 390 grams of heroin that came off the street as a result of the officers' break-in. However, that neglects the fact that the officers were not looking for drugs. Finding heroin was not a part of their agenda. They were looking for cash and stumbled across the heroin by mistake during a botched robbery while using their badges as a shield. There's also the question of where the drugs actually came from. They could have been planted in Sims' home, as the racketeering investigation proved the members of the task force had done so to frame others, and they were caught on tape with their own body cams. They thought they turned them off, of course. Remember, finding drugs was never a part of their mission. That means that they were the bad guys. Actually, the task force are worse than the bad guys because they stole after pledging to protect and serve the people of Baltimore. Meanwhile, our taxes paid their ridiculously high salaries and their fraudulent overtime. Yes. Yeah, they signed off cards on overtime they didn't work. Well, if you're a crook, you might as well carry it on. Embrace it. True police reform will never happen as long as we continue to make excuses for police officers when they break laws while celebrating every time they accomplish something they get paid to do. Our low standards are evident when we applaud cops reporting a drug bust, even when we find out their only true intention was to steal.
Dansez maintenant sous l'été, les pieds nus dans le sable. Dansez maintenant et jetez vos ennuis dans les vagues qui dansent, balancent.
Okay, finishing up here at the chef's table, Casey Michel from Think Progress penned this piece. There isn't an overlooked detail in Mueller's indictment of those Russian operatives. Last week's mammoth indictment identifying 13 Russians and a trio of Russian companies for leading a social media interference campaign in the U.S. revealed several details of the operation that would each be newsworthy on their own. The fact that Russian operatives communicated with unidentified Americans in Texas and took trips through Nevada, Colorado, and Illinois, the new insight into their fake PayPal accounts, stolen identities, and the lengths to which the Russian operatives went to mask their tasks. I continue to hear that this is all a hoax. The Russian thing is all a hoax. You don't get very many guilty pleas in a hoax. We're up to 4 right now, with more to come. Now, lost amidst the furor, however, is one peculiar overlooked reality. For as much detail as Mueller's indictment offered about the budgetary plans and travel itineraries of the Russian operatives, it didn't reveal anything new about the content of these fake Russian Facebook pages or the events organized therein. While Mueller's indictment provided a comprehensive overview of the operation, the themes, events, and content pushed by the Russian Facebook pages had all been reported elsewhere. That is to say, we learned plenty about what went on behind the scenes, but effectively nothing about what these Russian operatives actually pushed to the nearly 150 million combined Facebook and Instagram users unwittingly exposed to Russian material. That lack of insight is the latest strike against Facebook, whose reactions to revelations about Russian meddling have moved between begrudging acceptance and outright denial. Nearly 6 months after Facebook first announced it had removed numerous fake Russian accounts, our window into the actual content of these operations, of what was on the Russian pages rather than just the ads the Russian operatives purchased, remains remarkably limited. For instance, one of the biggest takeaways from the indictment seemed to be that these Russian efforts backed both Sanders and Jill Stein herself, a font of pro-Russian talking points throughout the election. But the links between Russian Facebook accounts and those two candidates have been public since September, when they were first reported by Politico. Another takeaway pointed to Russia's efforts at suppressing minority turnout. This too was reported months ago, including by Think Progress, which first broke the story of a Russian news site targeting Black Americans directly in October. Oh, yeah, among the material linked to the site, posts describing Clinton as both Satan's daughter and the root of all evil. Yeah, I heard that. Had to cut a few people loose because of it, too. Now, others appeared to only first realize, thanks to the indictment, that Russia had used these pages to organize rallies in the U.S., but we've known about these events, one in which included armed white supremacists, since September 7th, with further events reported at length thereafter. Of course, Facebook has been surprisingly or mysteriously silent. Unlike Twitter, whose internet research agency-related accounts found their way to the public via the House Intelligence Committee, Facebook has still refused to release a list of the hundreds of accounts linked to Russian operatives, instead pushing a ham-fisted attempt at affecting or notifying affected users months later. Or as the New York Times recently wrote, in the real-world terms, a part of Facebook still sees itself as the bank that got robbed, rather than the architect who designed a bank with no safes and no alarms or locks on the doors, and then acted surprised when burglars struck. Now, Russian propaganda, of course, lives on. It's going on right now. That's one of the reasons why Twitter did their Twitter lockout today. Yeah, once again, the President of the United States lost 4 million users, or followers. 4 million followers, just like that. 6 months after Facebook first announced it was taking down the fake Russian pages, material from the heart of Texas, yeah, that's one of the groups, useful dupes or they're idiots, maybe both, continue to percolate around Facebook, and to a far more significant degree than Facebook has revealed. The Texas in My Heart page, which first went live last May and remains up, has posted hundreds of images first shared by the Heart of Texas page, including after the latter went dark. But much of the material posted on Texas in My Heart included the memes, messaging, and that remains identical to that posted on the Heart of Texas site, from which awkward grammar, pro-secession, and anti-LGBTQ statements, all of which includes the Heart of Texas's watermark. And the posts continue through this week. As it is, it remains unclear if the Texas in My Heart page is run by the same Russian operatives behind the Heart of Texas page, or by those identified in Mueller's indictment. But the fact that such Russian material continues to live on and continues to find an audience on Facebook should be no surprise, nor, unfortunately, should Facebook. We're looking at you, Mark Zuckerberg. Their lack of response along the way. Well, we also know that there's been, millions and millions and millions of dollars pumped into Facebook by Russian oligarch. Got to look into that, don't we? Okay, we've reached the end of our broadcast period, but we will be back here tomorrow. So there's great content throughout the day. Breaking news as I speak. I wasn't able to get to it, but there's always breaking news. Stay tuned. You'll get filled in on the rest of the day from our national content people like Hartman and Randy Rhodes and Malloy. So stay tuned to Netroots Radio for the rest of the day. And we will visit with you tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui coulent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie d'un novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tendre, nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.